For decades now, the 27 Club has been quite the cultural phenomenon, and of course, the subject of many, many conspiracy theories, given just how many entertainers have tragically passed away at the age of 27. Of course, everybody is familiar with the bigger names in the club: Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, more recently, Amy Winehouse, among many, many others. But what about the dozens of others, the often overlooked ones, or the lesser known names, if you will? So today, I figured in honor of my fiance recently celebrating her 27th birthday, I figured we'll take a look at 7 overlooked members of the 27 Club. Here we go. While the term the 27 Club became largely popularized in 1994 following the death of Nirvana's Kurt Cobain, and the vast majority of the recognizable names of people who died at the age of 27 are from the 1960s on, the roots of the 27 Club can actually be traced all the way back to the late 1800s, beginning with the passing of Brazilian pianist and composer Alexandre Levy, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure I'm not. But given that the majority of this channel is music-based, mostly rock and metal, we're going to stick to rock or rock-adjacent musicians on this list. But note that there are plenty of members of the 27 Club who are not music-related, be it athletes, actors, even political figures, and so on. To call the first person on this list that we're discussing lesser known or overlooked or unpopular or something is most certainly a little bit of a stretch, to say the least. But I do feel that he's becoming increasingly more unknown in the modern era, and it's the one and only blues legend, Robert Johnson. I don't even know what I can say that hasn't already been said. I mean, the guy is basically responsible for rock and roll as we know it, and honestly, from a rather small catalog of music, only like, 30, 35 songs, something like that. Definitely no more than 40, I don't think. Hell, Robert Johnson is the guy who sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads to play the blues. Without him, that myth does not exist. The 1980s movie Crossroads with Ralph Macchio and Steve Vai as the devil's guitarist is also, of course, based on the tale of Robert Johnson. Born in 1911, there's unfortunately not really a whole lot that's known about Robert Johnson, as there's so many conflicting stories about his life. Things obviously weren't documented like back then like they are now, but he most certainly was poisoned just 3 days before his untimely death in 1938. I believe he was poisoned by the husband of a woman that he was flirting with, but the circumstances of his death are still rather unknown to this day, with the most common theories being the poison, obviously, syphilis, and Marfan syndrome. Moving on to the next member on this list, it's one of the founding guitarists of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones. Brian was a member of the Rolling Stones from the band's formation in 1962 and appeared on all albums up until Let It Bleed in 1969, which would be his last record with the band due to him being dismissed, as he had a number of problems in his personal life, most notably substance issues, and feeling alienated from the band, as initially he was more or less the band leader before it ended up turning into essentially the Mick Jagger and Keith Richards show, as it is still to this day, which most certainly caused tension. And to make things even worse, Jones was at one point dating model Anita Pallenberg, who she ended up leaving him for Keith while Jones was hospitalized after she and Jones had an altercation on a trip that they had taken to Morocco. Talk about awkward. He was eventually let go from the Stones in June of 1969, being replaced by Mick Taylor. Just about a month following his exit, on July 3rd, he was found by his girlfriend at the time in the swimming pool in his home. The coroner declared the cause of death as drowning, later clarifying as quote-unquote death by misadventure, while also noting that both his liver and his heart were enlarged due to all of his past substance abuse. A number of tributes were paid in the wake of Jones's death, and somewhat eerily, as a couple of them came from Jimi Hendrix, who dedicated a song to Jones on TV, and Jim Morrison of The Doors, who wrote a poem titled Ode to L.A. while thinking of Brian Jones, deceased. And obviously, both Hendrix and Morrison are basically the inspiration for this video, two very prominent members of the 27 Club. The Stones also would play a show just a couple of days after Jones passed. I believe it was actually their first show without him, and they ended up turning it into basically a tribute show. All right, up next, it's the Woodstock Day 2 headliner, co-vocalist and guitarist Alan Blind Al Wilson of Canned Heat. Canned Heat is best known for their classic Going Up the Country, which was based off of a 1928 blues song by Henry Thomas called Bulldoze Blues. But if you're around my age, you'll probably remember the song from the Skate 3 soundtrack, which, by the way, is probably the only instance ever to feature both Canned Heat and 3 Inches of Blood. Wild stuff. Anyways, Canned Heat formed in 1965 and became quite popular in the hippie culture, performing at a number of major events in the late 60s, most notably at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, Woodstock in 69.
69, dudes!
Alan had struggled quite a bit with depression, which was further fueled by his love of nature and his distaste for the way that the environment was being treated by humans. It's also said that he communicated better with nature than with people, and there's been some speculation that he was actually autistic, but at that time, not anywhere near as much was known about autism as it is today. He also had a strong dislike of touring and would often miss flights with the rest of the band, eventually catching another flight to catch up with them later on. Because of this, when he missed his flight to Germany on September 2nd, 1970, to start a European tour with the band, nobody was concerned, as this was commonplace with Wilson. He was eventually found dead a day later, though, on September 3rd, on Canned Heat co-vocalist Bob Hite's property due to accidental acute barbiturate intoxication. There are some theories out there that believe he committed suicide because of his bouts with depression over the years and suspicious quote-unquote accidents that some believe to be suicide attempts, but considering that there were actually 4 pills left in his pocket at the time of his death, coupled with the fact that there was no note left, there's not really too much merit in that theory. Prior to his death, he did get to achieve one of his life goals, though, which was recording with the blues legend John Lee Hooker for the Hooker and Heat record. And interestingly enough, for a short time after he was hospitalized after a bout of depression, he was actually in the custody of Bob Hite, the other co-vocalist from Canned Heat, once he was released from the hospital. What's really insane about the timing of Alan's death and the 27 Club is that immediately following his death, 2 of the most prominent figures of the 27 Club died within the following month. Jimi Hendrix just 2 weeks later, and then Janis Joplin 4 weeks later. Crazy stuff and oddly coincidental, to say the least. Real quick here, I gotta give a shout out to Mammoth Headwear for sponsoring this video, because perhaps you're like me, you have a massive head, have always struggled to find a hat that can fit you properly. Check out Mammoth Headwear. I'm actually wearing the hat right now. You can't see it, it's backwards, but I swear to God, it really is Mammoth. And it really does fit like a dream. There were some hats size 8.5 that wouldn't even fit my head. You can check out the link below and use promo code Logan at checkout for 10% off your order. And it's not just hats either. They got all sorts of shirts, hoodies, beanies, all kinds of stuff. Mammoth Headwear is the undisputed place to go if you have a massive head like I do. Next up is a founding member of the legendary Grateful Dead, Ron Pigpen McKernan. Obviously, a lot of bands in the psychedelic jam band world are widely known for their use of psychedelic drugs, but McKernan was actually not into that at all and preferred alcohol, which in part also sparked a close friendship with Janis Joplin, as she preferred alcohol over hard drugs as well. Hilariously, though, there was actually a weed bust in 1967, and he was arrested and fined even though he didn't smoke. Due to his heavy drinking and coupled with his contraction of primary biliary cholangitis in his mid-20s, which is an autoimmune disease of the liver, which supposedly was not related to his drinking, He eventually had to stop touring with the Dead in 1971. He was replaced by Keith Godchaux, but would actually end up rejoining the band alongside Keith for a short time before his health had eventually declined to the point that he could no longer perform. His final show was in the summer of '72 at the Hollywood Bowl in LA, which is also where Tom Petty played his final show just a week before his death in the fall of 2017. On March 8, 1973, Ron McKernan was found dead at his home due to a gastrointestinal hemorrhage, and former bandmate Jerry Garcia spoke at his funeral, saying, quote, "After Pigpen's death, we all knew this was the end of the original Grateful Dead." Switching things up a little bit, going now into the punk world, it's Dave Alexander, the original bassist for the Stooges, or Iggy and the Stooges, Iggy obviously being Iggy Pop. Dave played on the first two releases from the Stooges, the self-titled debut in 1969, and then Funhouse in '70, before being fired from the band about a month after the release of Funhouse, when he showed up completely inebriated and way too fucked up to perform at the Goose Lake International Music Festival in the Stooges' native Michigan. And my God, check out this lineup. I'll put the flyer up on the screen. Jethro Tull, Joe Cocker, Mountain, Bob Seger, Alice Cooper, James Gang. What a show that must have been. Holy shit. So many legends. In the years after his departure from the Stooges, he never actually joined any other band and lived off of profits that he had made from stock market investments. He would eventually pass away in February 1975 due to pulmonary edema after being hospitalized from pancreatitis stemming from his alcoholism. He is referenced by former bandmate Iggy Pop on the intro to his track Dum Dum Boys with the spoken word lyric, "How about Dave OD'd on alcohol." Moving on to someone I actually share a birthday with, May 15th, it's Uriah Heep bassist Gary Thain. Thain was not an original member of Uriah Heep, having joined the band in 1972 after touring with them in his previous band, the Keith Hartley Band, replacing Mark Clark and joining in time to appear on the Demons and Wizards record that same year, 1972. He would appear on 4 Uriah Heep albums in total, including Demons and Wizards, as I just said, The Magician's Birthday, which was also in 1972, Sweet Freedom in '73, and Wonderworld in '74. He would end up being fired from the band in early 1975 due to addiction issues, and just a few months after being seriously injured from getting shocked on stage at a show in Dallas, before eventually being replaced by John Wetton of King Crimson. He eventually died on December 8, 1975, after respiratory failure due to a heroin overdose. Finally, to wrap this one up, it's the guitarist for an extremely underrated metal band, Bryan Ottoson of American Head Charge. Although they've been around since the late 90s, American Head Charge has only released 4 studio albums since 1999, with Bryan Ottoson appearing on the 3rd album, The Feeding, which was their last up until 2016's comeback, quote-unquote, Tango Umbrella, which at this point will probably end up being their last record ever. In the spring of '05, AHC was on tour with Mudvayne, Blood Simple, and Life of Agony when Bryan's body was found on the bus on April 19th with the cause of death as an accidental prescription drug overdose. I guess at the time he also had severe strep throat and had a prescription for both an unnamed painkiller as well as penicillin. Quick sidebar before we wrap this one up. As I said before, this band is extremely underrated, but they've also had their fair share of abuse problems. And I'll never forget the first time I saw them back in 2015 on the Coal Chamber reunion tour along with Filter and Combi Christ. I believe it was the drummer at the time, and this was at Harpo's in Detroit, legendary venue. Their drummer almost got tossed by security because they thought he was a homeless guy just loitering around. That's how rough some of these dudes were. But anyways, phenomenal band, though. Definitely check them out if you're not familiar. All right, though, I got to run because, as I said earlier, my fiance recently turned 27, and I got to save all my energy so that I can attempt to join a different kind of 27 club, so I got to go. But thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks to Mammoth Headwear for sponsoring this video, where you can go to mammothheadwear.com and use code Logan at checkout for 10% off your order. And I will see you next time.